Today we're going to talk about books that if you read these handful of books, you will learn probably about 80 or 90% of what you ever could hope to gain from anything that has ever been written, will be written. And I know these are bold claims, but I think these works are so central to everything we know and everything that we understand about the world and will always understand about the world. So with that said, we'll get into this list. This is not a comprehensive list. I didn't include books like the Aeneid, the Odyssey, Paradise Lost by Milton. There's a lot of stuff I left off this. This is just, the list I have for you today. And I think I did a somewhat okay job on this. Maybe I didn't. Maybe there's a book I left off. But yeah, the first thing we have is Goethe's Faust. I hope I say that right. I know the first time I covered this, I did not know how to say the guy's name. It's so funny because I read the book and I couldn't even say his name, but it's Goethe. I'm like 80-90% sure on the fact that I'm saying it right. But Faust it's a very interesting play. I liken this to sort of the German Odyssey, that kind of level of influence that pretty much any author that has come from Germany or has understood German has read this book and has been deeply inspired by this book. We have the likes of Sigmund Freud, who appreciated its psychological depth. You have Jung, who was inspired by this shadow that is created through the Faustian bargain. You have Schopenhauer really didn't like anybody, but he liked Faust. You have Nietzsche, who was very much loved Faust as well. Well, maybe he had a different opinion later on in his career. I don't particularly remember. I remember early on, though, he did cite Goethe a lot. But you also have Hegel. You have the likes of Steiner, who kind of takes Goethe into the more esoteric side of things, which it's clearly there because you're making a deal with the devil. So there's certainly some more secret society aspects of it. I think Goethe himself was a Freemason, I want to say. I know he couldn't have written this and not had some sort of connection with some sort of mystery cult or mystery school. So just keep that in mind. There's something there. He at least knew about it at the very least. But the story it's the classic tale of somebody selling their soul to the devil. You have Dr. Faust, who he's seen as like the greatest sort of intellect in the world, but he still wants more, and it's that sort of idea of sacrificing your soul for something that is impermanent. And basically, Faust makes this deal with the devil. The devil comes from the form of a poodle, and then becomes... It's so funny because my girlfriend has a Shih Tzu poodle mix, so I'm like, I'm reading this book where a poodle's literally the devil, and that explains why your dog is so bad behaved. But anyway, personal anecdotes aside, I can't remember exactly the time frame, and I really have to go back and reread this book because of all that I've learned in the past year or so since reading this. But basically, the devil is a slave to Faust and everything he wants for a set amount of years, but whenever he asks for something, he kind of gets what he doesn't want. It's kind of that thing of, think of that trope where somebody makes a deal with the devil and they get exactly what they want, but it's in the most ironic and a way that can't kind of benefit the person, and it's that sort of thing. It's that sort of way of being rewarded, I guess we can say. And overall, just a really interesting book. There's lots of quotes in there that I keep seeing quoted, and every time I'm reading something and I see a quote from Faust, I'm like, I don't remember this when I read it, so I definitely have to go back and recollect myself. But just the sheer influence of this alone on so many, I don't know how important they are to you, but they're certainly influential voices, especially when it comes to the German philosophers and the German psychologists. And really the last century and a half since this was written, I don't know exactly when this was written, but really since that time there hasn't really been a work that has penetrated the ideological sphere so much as Faust. But yeah, I'm sure somebody can think of something, but to me, I think Faust is in recent memory one of the most important works. The next thing we have is the Republic by Plato. This is so important that I haven't even read it, and I know it's important. And I hate to say that because like this has been sitting on my desk for literally a year. I've had this sitting on my desk and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna read it now, and then I just don't get to it. And I promise you, it'll probably still be another few months before I get to it. But the reason I'm including The Republic is because you can't read a work of philosophy without getting to Plato. You can't look at the world without, in some way, confronting Plato's cave allegory. And I'll briefly explain Plato's cave allegory because I want this video to be somewhat substantive and you can pick up a little bit of important stuff here. So essentially, the most well-known aspect of this book is Plato's cave allegory, where there is a man and he and his fellow prisoners are chained to a wall, and there are shadows projected onto the wall through a fire. And people think that the whole world is just these shadow figures on the wall. But one day, the man is let go and he goes into the world and he sees the world as much more. And he tries to return to the cave. But when he returns to the cave, it's so dark that his eyes can't really see, and he can no longer go back to the way things were. And the prisoners, the fellow people chained up, they will not listen to him. They think he's crazy. And Plato says this allegory is to show the importance of a philosopher and the issues of a philosopher, because the philosopher, or the adept, I guess we can say, I hate using those kind of words, but the adept is able to see the world in a deeper and more penetrating way, and they can see the realities that other people just gloss over. And it's an eternal struggle to kind of show this to people. And I think this allegory is one of the most interesting aspects of philosophy in general, because it really explains why people see the world differently, why people see the world through their own lens, why people disagree, why people are able to believe such stupid things, and people are able to, not communicate with each other because you're seeing the world through your perception. That's essentially what this is. And this brings up the whole idea of the Platonic idea of forms, which is that what you see is not what is, and what you see is much deeper, or what you see is much more shallow than what actually is. I completely messed that up, I'm sorry. And you have people like Immanuel Kant, who pretty much just rip this off with their critique of pure reason. You have people like who else? Schopenhauer, who more or less kind of just says the exact same thing. And yeah, it seems to me like a lot of philosophy is purely just a retelling of Plato's ideas. Even some aspects of Nietzsche, I see his interpretations of Plato, and I kind of just say, like, I know where you got this from. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think to understand Western philosophy, you have to understand Plato. And the more I read, the more I realize I should just stop reading these more recent philosophers and just go back to reading Plato, because they're just retelling old tales. It's so frustrating. But the more I read, the more I learn the importance of this book. So we'll get into the next thing, because I feel like I'm dilly-dallying. I'm 8 minutes in, and I spent 4 minutes or 5 minutes talking about a book I haven't even read. So. All right, we have Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. And I chose this very intentionally. What's The Canterbury Tales? I think 14th century. I was reading this book, and I'm going to tell you guys a really funny story, because I must have laughed for like 10 minutes. So there's a part in the introduction. I'll tell this story before I get into what The Canterbury Tales is. But there's a part in the introduction where Geoffrey Chaucer is describing how fat a guy is, and he's like, I can't remember how many stones it was. It's so weird that that's a measurement. It's so weird that people measure people in stones. But it was like 12 stones or 15 stones. So I looked up how much that was, and he's going on about how fat this guy was, and I was like, let me look up how much this was. And it was like 225 or 230. I'm like, that's literally how much I weigh. Granted, this is talking about like almost the Dark Ages, like post-Dark Ages sort of England, and there wasn't as much food, but I still that really did bruise my ego in a certain way. It was so funny. I told my girlfriend, she's like, oh my god, well you're really tall, it's fine, it's not as bad. And I was like, it still hurts my soul. But anyway, the Canterbury Tales is a story about a collection of different people, different classes of society, different occupations, really just an insight onto England at the time, and kind of trying to define these somewhat universal archetypes of these, professions and classes and ideologies and sort of stuff. But it's a pilgrimage to a holy site, and the whole point of the Canterbury Tales is that the winner is going to get a free dinner. I hope I'm remembering the details properly. It's not super important because it was never finished. A lot of the stories are just kind of like, it really sucks that it was never finished, but the parts that are finished, it's tremendous. You have stories such as The Knight's Tale, which just is purely an Arthurian legend, I think is how you say it, like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, about chivalry and about righteousness and about what's right. And then you have The Miller's Tale, which is just some of the most profane and hilarious sort of nonsense. I don't even want to describe what it's about, but it's just it's funny, it's vile, it's sophisticated, it's all of the above at the same time. And really what Chaucer is trying to do is give you different perspectives on different people and how these perspectives kind of come together and how they kind of form a society. And the most interesting aspect about this book now is you read it and you can kind of, one, see the influences it has on even modern day literature, how it kind of formed various genres, such as, like, kind of how Shakespeare did the same thing. Chaucer did the same thing to a certain degree. And the reason I included Chaucer over Shakespeare on this list, because I don't think it's like fair to include everything written by Shakespeare. Like, if I had a collection of Shakespeare, I could say, yeah, if you read this, you'll get most of what you need to know about all of humanity. That would 100% be correct, but it's different works. Whereas this one's meant to be a singular piece, and that's why I think this teaches you so much more about humanity than just reading Julius Caesar or just reading Romeo and Juliet. Great books on their own, but I think just the depth of experience that you can get from the Canterbury Tales, and just how compelling the tales are, and how interesting, how he can seamlessly shift into different perspectives, and it's all done through a rhyming scheme, and he changes rhyming schemes based off of how smart or how dumb the person is, and it's just, it really is a masterpiece. I really need to go back and finish it. I literally put it down because I read The Knight's Tale, and the next few tales I was reading, I was like, it's just not as good. And that might be the problem with it. That's the problem with most short stories, is that you read short stories and you'll read one and you really resonated with, and the next one you're just like, well, I want to read that one I just read. I want to read the one I just got through. And I don't know, maybe that's just a personal thing. I'm sure other people feel that way. But on to the last thing. The last thing we have is The Divine Comedy by Dante. And if you want to know how good of a novel, this isn't a novel, but how good of a story The Divine Comedy is, Dante was in exile when he wrote this, and he published it, and then I don't know how much later, but the church basically adopted it as canon at a certain point. That's how influential it is. That's how important it is. And that's how deep the story is. And essentially, The Divine Comedy is about Dante going to the depths of hell and redeeming his soul, being reborn through forgiveness, being reborn through the Christian mythos. And it's super interesting because a lot of the symbols he uses are not necessarily Christian symbols. Like, he certainly does have them. There's obviously the devil, there's obviously God. But a lot of the figures he uses are just like contemporary political figures, or Italian figures. Think of like Roman emperors and people such as that. Odysseus is there. Virgil is the one that's guiding him. I think Homer's in there as well, from what I remember. But like, there's all these really interesting tidbits in the story, and I think the more you read the story, the more you can find in it. And it really is one of those stories that, like, you could gain every single shred of information that you ever need to learn in this book alone. And if you don't believe me, just understand William Blake spent the dwindling years of his life reading this book. He taught himself Italian just so that he could understand this poem and understand its depth, and really get a deeper perception of what he was trying to do. And then he was doing his own drawings of each chapter and each scene, and he was really getting into it. And you have other figures such as Borges, who was completely obsessed with this story as well. You even have Joyce, who was very much moved by this story and very much mapped a lot of what he was writing simply through kind of stealing some of Dante. How much, maybe we can debate that, but there's certainly the influence of Dante into something like Ulysses and, Joyce's writing as a whole. But yeah, I think this is a pretty deep, comprehensive list that if you really deeply study all of these books, I think you have a whole lot to learn. And I think if you spent the same amount of time reading this book as most people spend studying things their entire lives, you will have more than enough expertise, you will have more than enough wisdom to go around. And that's really the point of the video that I'm making, is that there's certain books that if you reread, if you study, if you really go into depth on, they have all of humanity wrapped up in them. I'm definitely going to do a part 2 to this video, because the more I talk about things like this, the more I want to talk about something like the Odyssey or something like the Aeneid, which I still need to read. And I know I'm leaving stuff off the list. I know I'm not going into depth about everything that needs to be studied, and there's just so many important books that capture the entire essence of the human race into a handful of pages, into a short, tiny text. I mean, I purposely left off holy books and things of that, like, because I think it's not really fair to include something like the Bible. The Bible is just one of the most complex and one of the most intricate things ever. You could argue the Gita is the same way. I mean, I've been moved by both of them. The Tao Te Ching is up there as well, and more of these timeless, sort of eternal, sort of infinite sort of books. But I was just specifically speaking today about things written by people, and we know they're written by people, and we don't have this mythos attached to them, whereas I guess Dante has a little bit of mythos attached to him. But yeah, with that said, if you read these 4 books, you will get 80 to 90% of all of humanity encapsulated in them, and let this be a reason for you to go pick those up. With that said, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. Peace out. I'll catch you in the next one.